Everyone at the gym laughed at him, until a former student revealed that this janitor was a war hero. Maplewood, Ohio, was a small world with houses lined up along the road, old oak trees, and the same faces always walking around. Life was slow here. There was a diner on the main street, filled with the smell of coffee and pastries in the morning, and only a few tables left in the evening. The corner shops were usually places where old friendships were nurtured. But for the town's young people, the most important place was the gym just outside the center, Maplewood Fitness. The gym was always energetic, sweaty, and noisy. The clanging of metal weights, the thumping of headphones, and the laughter of young people created the gym's atmosphere. But amidst that noise, there was always a quiet shadow. Every morning, before the sun had risen, a gray-haired, slightly hunched man would appear at the gym's door. He carried an old broom, wore a work jacket that had been worn for years. His shoes were quiet, his steps measured. Before the young people arrived, he would sweep the floor, wipe the mirrors, and remove the dust that had settled in the corners. No one knew his name. One day, someone had called him Uncle Hank, and the name stuck. He neither objected nor corrected it. He didn't greet anyone, but he would tilt his head slightly as if acknowledging a greeting. Everyone saw him, but no one really looked at him. Among the young athletes, Hank was a subject of jokes. "Uncle Hank is here again, sweeping the weights," many would tease. While they laughed, Hank would simply press his broom to the ground and continue working at his own pace. Director Tom, however, sensed something different about this man he had been observing for years. There was an odd balance in his movements, an old discipline in his muscles, and in his eyes, the weariness of another place. He never held the broom casually, he gripped it like a rifle. And he always wore the same uniform. There was a noticeable bulge in his pocket. No one wondered about it. No one dared to ask what he was carrying in that room. Until that afternoon. It was July 2025. The temperature outside had reached 40 degrees, and the room was packed with young people for the weekly exercise competition. The young men, their chests puffed out, saw the sound of the weight plates hitting the floor as a kind of victory cry. Those posing in front of the mirrors added to the noise in the gym. Hank, as usual, was sweeping the floors in the corner, unnoticed. At that moment, one of the most popular young men in town, Matt, approached him. "Hey, Uncle Hank," he said in a mocking tone, "you can't be a champion with that broom." The group behind him burst into laughter. Hank slowly raised his head. He fixed his eyes on Matt's. That look, it was brief, but the young man's smile faded instantly. Something had happened, but no one understood what it was. Just then, the gym door opened. The man who entered stood silhouetted against the sunlight. He had short hair, a muscular build, and a military posture. Discipline emanated from him beneath his athletic attire. This man was Jake Henderson. A former soldier, he was now a fitness trainer who had recently moved to Maplewood. He had come for the first time at the invitation of the gym's manager, Tom. As he stepped inside, he glanced around. But his eyes lingered on one person, Hank. His eyes widened. His face changed from surprise to a mixture of fear and respect. He slowly walked toward Hank. The young people stopped talking and watched what was happening. Jake stood right in front of him and asked, his voice trembling, "Commander Miller? Is that you?" The gym fell silent. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Hank stopped sweeping and fixed his eyes on Jake's. He said nothing. But that look carried the weight of years of experience. And in that moment, the same question echoed in everyone's mind, who was this man really? As soon as Hank heard Jake's voice, he slowly put the broom down. His eyes locked onto Jake's. There was no anger on his face, nor any satisfaction. Just, the weary astonishment of an unexpected encounter. Jake, however, approached a few more steps with excitement. He spoke without lowering his voice, but almost unable to control his emotions. "You were the commander of the Ranger unit during the Gulf War in 1991. Captain Henry Miller, aren't you? The crowd in the gym froze. The barbells lay silently. The young athletes looked at Jake and Hank, trying to understand what was being said. Hank remained silent for a few seconds. Then he bowed his head slightly. Neither a confirmation nor a denial, but that bow was enough to say it all. Jake continued. His voice was filled with admiration and gratitude. We were trapped in Iraq, in that hellish heat. I remember. I can't forget the moment you arrived in the middle of the night. We were all done for. You crossed the enemy lines alone. With only a rifle on your back. We still don't know how we survived. But your face, your eyes that night. I've never forgotten them. A brief shadow fell across Hank's face. His eyes dropped to the ground. He said nothing about what he had just experienced, but the lines on his face stood as silent witnesses to all those years. Jake paused for a moment, then rolled up the sleeve of his jacket. On his left arm, he revealed a tattoo etched into his skin, a ranger dagger and wings. I got this tattoo after your unit, he said, his voice trembling with pride. You weren't just a commander to us. You were our reason for surviving. Hank's gaze fixed on Jake's tattoo. Then he slowly rolled up the sleeve of his own jacket. On his skin was the same tattoo, faded but still there, despite the years' attempts to erase it. It had faded, but the shape was clear. A silence echoed through the room. One of the young men whispered, "Is this a joke?" The others were frozen in place. The old man sweeping the floor before their eyes had suddenly transformed into a legend from a battlefield years ago. That night, Jake sat down at his computer as soon as he got home. His heart was still racing. He typed 1991 Gulf War Ranger Commander into the search bar. The first results were general information, but as he delved deeper into the pages, he found an article. The title, The Forgotten Unit, The Silent Heroes of the Gulf. The article described a special operation that took place in 1991. A group of Rangers had been trapped behind enemy lines. In the darkness of the night, a lone commander had rescued them. The names were censored for security reasons. But one sentence caught Jake's attention: the commander managed to keep 20 soldiers alive on his own. His leadership saved lives at a time when unit morale was at its lowest. There was a faint note at the bottom, the commander's name, Lieutenant Henry Miller. Jake leaned back in his chair. His eyes on the screen, his mind on Hank's face. No, his name wasn't Hank anymore. He wasn't a janitor, he was the living proof of a legend. Captain Henry Miller had chosen to stay in the shadows, sweeping the floors of a gym in Maplewood years later. But why? Why had he left his heroic past behind and chosen a quiet life that everyone had forgotten? This was the only question that troubled Jake's mind. And the answer might be hidden in that bulge Hank had carried in his pocket for years. The next morning, Maplewood Fitness was filled with the usual smell of sweat and metal. Young people were warming up in front of the mirrors, music was playing, and dumbbells were being lifted and lowered. But Jake Henderson's mind was elsewhere. His eyes were on the corner of the gym. There, as usual, was Hank. He was sweeping the floor with his old broom, cleaning the baseboards, moving around in the same silence. What had happened yesterday was still fresh in his mind. But there was not the slightest change in Hank's demeanor. He was still like a shadow in the gym. Visible, but unnoticed. At least by some. Jake took a deep breath and walked toward Hank. His heart was racing. He wasn't sure if he was going to show respect to a hero or overstep his bounds by uncovering a secret. He stopped in front of Hank. "Commander," he said in a low voice. Hank stopped sweeping, looked at Jake, but said nothing. Jake continued, "Why are you working here? This isn't where you belong. You're a hero." Hank paused for a moment. Then he raised his hand, gently cutting Jake off. "Some people want to forget, son," he said, his voice as soft but firm as the first light of morning. "The war is over, and so am I." He resumed sweeping the floor, but this time there was a brief pause in his movements. Jake wanted to say something else to him, but he changed his mind. He just bowed his head and stepped aside. That day, Jake began talking to the young people in the hall. At first, most of them didn't believe him. "Hank. You're joking," some said. But Jake showed them his tattoo. He explained the operation. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here today," he said. Slowly, a whisper began to spread among the athletes. Hank was now being viewed differently. The young people who had once ignored his presence were now watching him out of the corner of their eyes. Sarcastic remarks gave way to silent respect, and dismissive glances gave way to shy greetings. Mia, one of the young people working at the gym, also heard these conversations. Her curiosity was piqued. That night, when she went home, she dove into internet archives. She read pages of documents using the keyword 1991 Gulf War, Ranger operations. Hidden reports, clipped newspaper articles, censored military documents. And finally, she came across a detail: Captain Henry Miller. Under enemy fire, he had single-handedly established a unit and kept 20 soldiers alive throughout the night. He had been shot but had not abandoned his position. One of the soldiers he had saved said in an interview years later, "If Miller hadn't been there, my grave would be under the sand." As Mia read the lines on the computer screen, she pictured Hank silently cleaning the living room every morning. That heavy gait, those eyes scanning the surroundings, that gaze that avoided eye contact with anyone but saw everything. It all made sense suddenly. The next day, Mia told Tom, the lounge manager, what had happened. Tom shook his head in disbelief. "I've known Hank for 30 years. He's quiet. He's disciplined. But I had no idea he was like that," he said. Then he looked out the window at Hank. "So he's been sweeping his past away in that corner all along." By the end of the day, Hank's corner had changed. The young people were more respectful around him now. One offered to carry the cleaning bucket, another left a protein bar on his desk. Hank didn't thank any of them, but there was a sparkle in his eyes. He merely nodded slightly to Jake. That glance was perhaps the first time in years he had accepted another person's gratitude. And Maplewood Fitness, from that day onward, was no longer just a gym but also a place where the footsteps of a quiet hero could be felt. Hank's quiet past had now spread throughout Maplewood. The story, which began with whispers among the young people, made its way to a small corner of the local newspaper. It eventually reached the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, local, one of the most respected institutions in the town. One day, a handwritten note was posted on the entrance door: "This Saturday, there will be a special meeting at the Maplewood VFW Hall. Subject: Captain Henry Miller." On the day of the meeting, the hall was packed. War veterans, retirees, young athletes, hall staff, everyone was there. But Hank wasn't. As usual, he had gone to the gym early in the morning, quietly cleaned up, and then retreated to his corner. He had received an invitation to attend the meeting but had chosen not to go. For him, the past was still a burden that shouldn't be spoken of. He just wanted to live. At the meeting, Jake took the stage. He held a few old photos, some clippings, and a heart full of gratitude. "If I'm here today, it's because of this man," he said, his voice trembling. "When we were stranded in the desert in Iraq, only one person came to rescue us. That man was the one who swept the streets of this town, Captain Henry Miller." The hall fell silent. Then an old man, leaning on his cane, stood up. The medals from years ago were still pinned to his uniform jacket. "I am retired Sergeant Mark Hennessy," he said. "I'll never forget that night. As bullets rained down, he came alone through the darkness. He gathered us all together, loaded us onto his back. He carried the wounded. He gave us morale. He gave us courage. Henry Miller, he wasn't just a commander, he was the reason we survived." The applause that followed filled the room. Eyes welled up, heads bowed. The next morning, there was an unusual silence at the entrance to Maplewood Fitness. The young people had arrived early. They were waiting for Hank. At 6 a.m., the door opened. When Hank entered, there was a table right in front of the door with an elegant frame on it. Inside was a plaque with gold letters on a silver background. To Captain Henry Miller, from the people of Maplewood, in gratitude for his extraordinary courage and leadership during the 1991 Gulf War. Hank took the plaque in his hands. He looked at it for a moment. A sparkle that hadn't been seen in years appeared in his eyes. He put the plaque in his pocket, but paused for a moment before grabbing his broom that day. The young people approached him, one saying, "Good morning, Commander." Then another added, "We're doing the heavy lifting for you today." Hank smiled. His face relaxed, his eyes sparkled. That day, Jake came to Hank's side. "Everyone in this town knows you now," he said. Hank turned to him and spoke slowly, "Perhaps command isn't just about war, son. Perhaps it's also about being here, among these young people. As long as leadership is done quietly but honestly." Hank was no longer just an old janitor. The man who quietly walked through the Maplewood gym every morning was now a figure everyone respected. His broom no longer swept just dust, it swept away years of prejudice. And the same question echoed in everyone's minds. Have you ever met someone like Hank? Someone who leads quietly, walking in the shadows?